Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. In the latest development in the Syrian conflict, after tensions have been hitting the boiling point between Russia and Turkey, the Syrian foreign minister has just given a statement saying Syria does not want to see fighting with Turkey. Now, this comes a day after Ankara said one of its posts in Syria's Idlib region was attacked from an area controlled by the Syrian government forces. Russia, which supports Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in his country's civil war, and Turkey, long a backer of the rebels, co-sponsored a de-escalation pact for this area, Idlib that is, and that has been in place since last year. But the escalating air raids and shelling in the area carried out by the Syrian regime and Russian forces have made the deal incoherent at best. The Turkish foreign minister had rejected Russia's claim that they couldn't stop Syrian forces from attacking Turkish outposts in Idlib, calling it an excuse. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu has said that Russia and Iran are the guarantors of peace in Syria and they should play that role. We will be examining today the complexity that is Syria and its allies, what is at stake for each of the regional players here, and how and when will peace be established, especially considering recent developments. Here, I'd like to welcome our guests. We are joined by George Szamuely, an analyst joining us from Budapest, Hungary. Also, we have with us Ms. Nahid Al-Husseini, the Damascus Bureau Chief for Veterans Today, an online independent news journal. She's also a member of the American Institute for Middle East Strategic Studies. So we will be discussing what has just evolved. I want to start with you, Ms. Nahid. If you could give us a snapshot of these developments in your point of view, especially in the past week between Turkey and Russia in Idlib.
Well, you know very well that Idlib right now is a focal point. Idlib right now is a hot point. And I'm sure you are fully aware of the international agreements between Turkey, Russia, Iran on Idlib. There has been so many formats in Astana, in Sochi, in Kazakhstan. And I do believe that the Syrian government is fully committed to all international agreements concluded and agreed by the guarantors.
Okay, so it's interesting you say you feel that the Syrian government is committed to the Astana agreement, to the Sochi Accord, but it was the Syrian regime forces that attacked these outposts belonging to Turkish military in Idlib, which they weren't supposed to do according to the ceasefire agreed between Turkey and Russia.
Dear, we have so many conflicting reports in the media. You know that I am working for the United States of America for the Veterans Today organization, which is intelligence, security, and media organization, and very independent, is not affiliated with the American government. We do receive so many conflicting reports from different places. Why would the Syrians attack? We have the de-escalation zone there. Probably the terrorists, the militants, supported by
that is the $1 million that we are trying to address. Why would they attack? One of the many questions. But we are getting reports from Syrian Observatory Human Rights Organization that 34 of those that were killed in these clashes, 26 were pro-government fighters and 8 of the opposition. I mean, there were also air raids on Saturday, on the 15th of June. There were air raids by the Russian-backed Syrian regime on the 16th of June. That was Sunday. Are you saying that none of these were, because of none of these, the Turkish outposts were attacked and the foreign minister is making allegations?
I think there is an axe to grind in this, my dear. I think somebody wants to pull the Syrian army into confrontation with the Turkish army. Who is doing this, my dear? We have the militants there. We have Jabhat al-Nusra. We have also other militants affiliated with Jabhat al-Nusra. We have ISIS. We have so many terrorist groups there. Why would the Syrian government get into conflict with Turkey?
Okay,
no,
well,
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay, look, our other guest, Mr. George, let's pull you into this conversation. What is your take on this? Do you agree with what Ms. Nahid is saying? Why would the Syrian government be attacking Turkish outposts in Idlib?
Well, I do think that there doesn't seem to be a great deal of logic in the Syrian government forces attacking Turkey. There is a certain logic in the Syrians, alongside the Russians, putting pressure on Turkey to curtail the activities of the HTS, which is the main jihadi organization that's in charge in Idlib. Mm-hmm. And I think that it does make sense for them to make clear, for them, I mean the Syrians and the Russians, to make clear to Turkey that Turkey has to abide by the agreements it signed in September, which is to prevent attacks on Syrian forces mm-hmm. from the demilitarized zone.
And so when you say that, it almost seems from your understanding, and also what Ms. Nahid is saying along those lines, when the Russian minister comes out and he says, we are not responsible, we don't control the Syrian regime's forces on the ground and how they operate, and along with this, it's basically implying that some kind of attack did take place, whether or not it was to curtail the groups on the ground, the militant groups on the ground, or to pressurize Turkey.
Well, it's possible. It's very hard to know the exact details of each and every event. Mm-hmm. There is clearly an incentive on the part of Syria and Russia to do something about Idlib. Now, Russia has made clear that it's going to stick by the last September's agreement, that there won't be any major offensive against Idlib. Mm-hmm. However, they are putting pressure on Turkey to do something about the demilitarized zone, because these attacks continue to take place from the demilitarized zone. And clearly Turkey hasn't abided by that agreement. And also Turkey just hasn't really weeded out the HTS, which it was supposed to do. I mean, it was the whole point of this agreement was that this essentially internationally outlawed organizations wouldn't be able to function in freedom in Idlib. That was part of the agreement, and yet this has continued. So
right,
essentially,
but, okay, so you're saying Turkey didn't abide by its part of the agreement, correct, Mr. George?
Yes.
Right, that they were supposed to de-escalate and demilitarize the militants present there. Yes. But also part of the agreement was to establish that this 3 million population in Idlib, this was supposed to be a buffer zone. This was supposed to be a de-escalation zone. So when violence escalates and air raids continue to the tune of killing 352 civilians, and this I'm quoting here, the Syrian Network for Human Rights, which includes attacking 29 medical facilities, 60 schools, 38 places of worship, 984 civilians. So technically, none of the parties have been holding up their part of the deal, correct?
Well, I wouldn't cite those statistics. I don't buy that statistics that you have just cited. But you could argue that they haven't, the Syrian government hasn't abided by its agreement. But you could only argue that on the assumption that it's perfectly all right for them to stand aside and allow internationally outlawed organizations to gain strength in Idlib, because that's what is happening. I mean, Jabhat al-Nusra is an outlawed organization, and none of the ceasefire agreements that have been signed at the United Nations apply to Jabhat al-Nusra and the offshoot of Jabhat al-Nusra, which is the HTS. None of them. They are still outlawed, and therefore all military activities against Jabhat al-Nusra are perfectly legitimate.
Okay, Ms. Nahid, I'll come back to you. There was something you specifically said, that there seems to be an axe to grind. It's a comment you made that there would be a reason or for making these allegations. Would you like to elaborate a little more on that?
Well, I'm sorry, Sally, you are quoting this observation post, which is based in UK, in United Kingdom, right? And you are not, hello?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
And you are not quoting the Syrian government or taking any notes from any military or official communication, communiques. This is what I'm talking about.
Okay, so why don't you give us the numbers? So what does the Syrian regime have to say about the recent escalation in the region? Do you think?
No, you should take, what I'm saying, you should take the point of view of both sides. This is what I'm saying. I am talking to you as an independent journalist, and I'm talking to you as Veterans Today Bureau Chief in Damascus, Syria, my dear. Okay. I see an axe to grind, of course. I do see an axe to grind in this, and I do not think, I do reiterate again here, I do not think any interest for the Syrian government or the Syrian army to get into confrontation with the Turkish army.
Why do you think Turkey would be making such strong allegations at a time like this, especially considering that if we look at the global picture here, it's already having a tough time with what used to be a very good, strong ally, the US? Why would it pick up a fight right now in the region with Russia and Syria?
Well, listen, dear, you know very well that Turkey is right now supporting Jabhat al-Nusra. And I will tell you something very important. From the beginning of this year until now, they have allowed 1,500 trucks full of equipment and high-tech weapons to enter Idlib, escorted by Turkish officers, Turkish military officers. In addition to that, they have supplied Jabhat al-Nusra with air-to-air missiles, which are mounted on shoulder. Okay?
So this very key information that you are quoting right now, what kind of intelligence reports are you relying on for this? Or is this on-ground reporting that you have done yourself?
I am relying on my organization in the United States. All of them are veterans, ex-veterans who fought in Vietnam. And you know very well what I'm talking about. It is a security and intelligence organization, my dear.
Okay. Mr. George, let me come back to you as we're nearing, we've got the last few minutes left. Let me get your take on how do you see the situation evolving now, moving forward, in terms of the agreement also that was reached between Russia and Turkey on a ceasefire last week, and in the hope that escalations would go down in this zone?
Well, the Russians have made clear that they're not planning any major offensive against Idlib. They've ruled that out. They've ruled that out explicitly. However, they have made clear to Turkey that their patience will eventually run out if this the shooting from the demilitarized zone continues, and Syria continues to sustain casualties. And more seriously, if Russian forces become the targets of shooting from the demilitarized zone. But the situation can't go on indefinitely. I mean, the Syrian government has pretty much retaken most of the country, with the exception of Idlib. And as your guest has pointed out, the forces within Idlib, this HDS, the Jabhat al-Nusra offshoot, is gaining in strength. And there is a limit to how long Syria is going to tolerate this. I mean, you can't just allow this jihadi organization to continue to gain in strength, and then presumably down the road, a year or two's time, the civil war returns to its former intensity. So something will have to give at some point. At the moment, Russia does not want a confrontation with Turkey. But as you pointed out earlier, Turkey is increasingly isolated. So Turkey, because it now has poor relations with the United States for various reasons, so Turkey is losing its leverage against Russia. And at some point, Russia may well turn around and say, look, if you want our help against the United States, just let Idlib go. Let us just take care of Idlib once and for all. We're not there yet, but that could happen some point down in the future.
Okay, so that could happen sometime in the future. Ms. Nahid, you spoke recently to the Ba'ath Party member, Dr. Afif Dalla, and he talked about how these pressures will continue to escalate. What was his take on these recent developments? Is Turkey playing its role that it had agreed to in the Sochi agreement? And is this the way forward for peace in the region?
My dear Dr. Dalla and I, we discussed the global conflict, all right, which is Syria part of it. I think it's not in the interest of the United States of America, which is right now spreading systematic chaos in the world and in the region in particular, to stop any acts of hostilities or to reach any political settlements. You see that the whole region right now is on fire. And United States of America is investing in this, my dear. Mm-hmm. And also investing in the geopolitics of Syria, in Idlib, and in the east of the Euphrates. So I do not see any de-escalation. I see further escalation of the situation in Syria and in the region as a whole.
Okay, so help me understand this a little more. We're running out of time, but I really want to cover this point. How do you see U.S.'s role in this? I'm still trying to get some clarity on this, especially considering President Trump has been a bit up and down on his policy on Syria and generally in the Middle East, especially when he earlier, some months ago, announced the withdrawal of troops from there.
The Americans are planning to prolong the war in Idlib. And they're going to put obstacles in the face of the Syrian army and Russia to liberate Idlib. And at the same time, of course, by the help of Turkey. I mean, you are saying that Turkey is not ally of the United States. No, Turkey is still an ally.
No, I'm not. I didn't say that it wasn't an ally. I'm talking about the deteriorating relationship between the two allies.
Okay. Now I understand. Deteriorating, I understand, but it's still a major ally, of course, of the United States. And at the same time, the Americans are working in the east of the Euphrates with the Saudis. I'm sure you are aware of the visits paid by the Saudis official to east of the Euphrates, Sabhan. Mm-hmm. And he met with the tribes, the Syrian tribes, of course, in the presence of high-level American military officials. What are they doing there, my dear? What plans they have? And they visited a very important military base in Tabaka, and they are planning. When I say they are, I mean the Americans are planning to expand the military place in Raqqa and bring in more troops.
Right.
The question is why? What for? What is the plan? If they want peace in Syria, if they want compromises, if they want political solutions, I don't think they will do this. I'm sure they are working on something dangerous. And they are
What do you think they're working on?
I think they are working on escalating the situation in the east of the Euphrates. Mm-hmm. And bribing the tribes and trying to create kind of self-autonomy in east of the Euphrates, separates Damascus, or separate Damascus from the east of the Euphrates. This is what they are doing right now. Okay. They want to partition Syria and split up Syria. And if you recognize and see the Israeli attacks, attacks on Idlib and other places, you can realize.
Okay. I'm sorry, I've got to cut you there, Ms. Nahid. We're running out of time. I want to get a quick closing comment from Mr. George on your take on the U.S.'s role being disruptive in the region at best. Mr. George, would you agree with this analysis that Ms. Nahid has given?
I do agree. Trump did the whole entertainment thing last year when he said, "Oh, I'm going to pull troops out of Syria." He didn't mean any of it. I mean, it was just some little bit of theater. There are no plans to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. The goal is Iran and the kind of conflict with Iran. And I think that here Americans and the Israelis are together in trying to break up what they call the Shiite crescent. That's the crescent that connects Iran, Iraq, through Syria into Lebanon. And what they're trying to do is to break this up. And because this is what Israel regards as its some kind of an existential threat. And then once that's gone, then pretty much all of Israel's rivals are eliminated from the scene. And I think that's really the goal here. So they're maintaining this presence in Syria, preventing any kind of a consolidation of the Syrian government, and thereby elimination of Iranian influence from the region. And I think that's the ultimate goal. Turkey's goal is something different. I mean, Turkey's goal is still to maintain its influence within Syria, to eliminate the Kurdish forces. And so they're kind of aligned on this issue. But
right.
Turkey's goal is
it also helps the U.S.'s narrative in the region as well, not barring the fact that they are, despite the deteriorating relationship, still allies to the U.S. With that, we've run out of time, though. I would like to thank you very much, Mr. George and Ms. Nahid, for your contribution here on Newswire. We're going to take a quick, short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. At least 30 people have lost their lives in a triple suicide bombing outside a video hall in northeastern Nigeria on Sunday. Now, according to emergency service officials, another 40 were injured in a separate attack in Kunduga village in Borno State. While the militant Islamist group Boko Haram is being blamed for the attack, they haven't claimed responsibility for this yet. Who is the Boko Haram in Nigeria? Let's find out in this short report, and then we'll come back and explore what is going on in this state of Nigeria with our panel of experts.
Boko Haram, which literally means westernization is sacrilege, is an Islamic sectarian movement in northeastern Nigeria. It was founded in 2002 by a 32-year-old Muhammad Yusuf, an Islamic preacher from Yobe State. He was later captured and killed by Nigerian police in 2009. The country's 150 million people are split almost equally between Muslims in the north and Christians in the south. Boko Haram's aim is to overthrow the government and impose a strict version of Islamic law. The group forbids the Muslim community from taking part in politics or even getting a Western education. Boko Haram has been responsible for a spate of brutal suicide attacks in the region. After being declared a terrorist group by the US in 2013, Boko Haram ramped up its attacks in northern and central Nigeria. They bombed churches, bus ranks, bars, military barracks, and even the police and UN headquarters in the capital, Abuja. The government declared a state of emergency in May 2013 in the 3 northern states where Boko Haram was strongest: Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa. In April 2014, Boko Haram drew international condemnation by abducting schoolgirls from Chibok town in Borno State. Some escaped and few were released, but still most girls are in captivity. The international community condemned the act, despite the government's claim that it had been technically defeated, with the region's chronic poverty and poor education system helping it gain new recruits.
So Boko Haram, which literally translates into westernization is sacrilege, we saw when they were established and how the group has had a foothold in northeastern Nigeria. We will be also exploring with our guests what this means for not just Nigeria, but also the African region itself. The Nigerian government has said that Boko Haram and the rival Islamic State of West Africa Province group are all on their last legs. And there is a fear yet from observers on how these attacks are picking up pace and the affiliation, the growing affiliation with ISIS and other terrorist groups is evolving unheeded. So let me introduce our guests who will be talking about this with us. We have with us Fidelis Mbah, a journalist from Doha who is joining us. He's extensively reported on the group's activities in Nigeria. We also have with us Ms. Anietie Ewang. She is a researcher for a Human Rights Watch. She's joining us from Nigeria. And we have Mr. Ibanga Isine, is a multiple award-winning investigative reporter and journalism teacher. He's also the publisher of Next Edition online newspaper. He's joining us from Nigeria also. Welcome to all of you to the show. I want to start with you, Mr. Fidelis. What is your understanding of, while the Boko Haram has not yet taken responsibility, of who might be behind this attack that killed 30 people?
Clear, first of all, that Boko Haram is no longer the one united organization that it was about 10 years ago. In recent years, between 2 to 3 years ago, the group became fractionalized. Now we have what used to be the original Boko Haram being led by the leader, Abubakar Shekau. And then we have another faction of the Boko Haram that is aligned to ISIS, and they are called ISWAP West Africa. So these two groups in recent months have been competing for attention, trying to stamp their authority for people to actually recognize which faction is superior to the other. In recent years, both of them have been carrying attacks and trying to outdo each other. As for the attack in Borno State, which happened Sunday night, no group has come out to claim responsibility. This is not unexpected because in recent years, recent months, Boko Haram have always not come out after every attack to claim responsibility. What they've done mostly is when it involves the killing of security agents or members of security agencies, they're very quick to come out with proof, photos, and maybe seize military fatigue and the vehicles to actually show that they are behind the attack. But in this case, yes, just about 30 people. For them, that's not a very huge number considering their antecedents. Maybe if it was anything, maybe more than 50 people that were killed in the attack, it's possible they would have come out to claim responsibility. Another factor could be the fact that the military, a few days ago, did come out to say that they killed nearly 10 members of the Boko Haram media team. So it's also not impossible, if that claim by the military is correct, it's also not impossible that since the media team has been sort of disorganized, that maybe the new team they're trying to put together has not been organized enough to be able to issue statements or to take videos or pictures to confirm that they actually carried out this attack.
Okay. So here I want to also get in you, Mr. Ibanga, talking about a recent report that just came out following this attack by UNICEF, saying that children were used, at least 5 children were used in this suicide bombing. Does that make it a sort of a sign that it is very likely that Boko Haram could have carried this out?
Yes, apart from Boko Haram and the previous speaker just said, it's only Boko Haram and its affiliates in Nigeria or West African sub-region that could carry out attacks of such magnitude. And suicide bombing started a few years ago after Boko Haram lost some of the sorts of territories it was controlling in the northwestern Nigeria. Okay. So
northeastern Nigeria.
This attack is, yes, northeastern Nigeria. Because although there are skirmishes in some other parts of the country by other groups like the headers and kidnapping all over the country, the main point of attack by Boko Haram is the northeast. And the NEMA, what they call, okay, the State Emergency Management Agency, the head of operations, State Emergency Management Agency in Borno State, where this incident happened, that the attack, which happened on Sunday, claimed 30 lives and then 40 people were injured. And there's a possibility that the number of casualties, fatalities might increase as the day go by.
Okay.
But in Nigeria, we all know that Boko Haram that's responsible for this kind of attacks.
Right, so Boko Haram is known to do these kind of attacks, irrespective of the factions that it has evolved into over the past 10 years. But Ms. Anietie, we're trying to also understand here what the situation means for peace and security in Nigeria. There has been a spate of attacks in the past week in various parts of the country. Is there any kind of connection across all of these attacks to what has happened on Sunday night?
I think the very main connection that we're seeing is the fact that security continues to be a problem across the country. Whether we're looking at it regarding the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast or violent banditry and criminality in the northwestern region, or the thriving conflict between nomadic headsmen and farming communities in the north central, I think one of the main things and the main nuances to draw out of all of these incidents is that the security forces are failing to ensure peace and security across the region. And in across country, we have 7.7 million people in need of humanitarian aid. We have millions of people being displaced from their homes because they do not feel safe because of one crisis or the other. And you have the death toll continuing to rise across the region. So I think the main thing that we draw across all of these incidents that continue to happen across the country is that our security forces are failing in their duty to ensure that peace and security is in place in the country.
Mr. Fidelis, why do you think the security forces in Nigeria are failing to bring this violence across the country into some sort of control?
Well, the issue of the terrorism in Nigeria is widespread, not just in Nigeria, but across other countries across the Sahel. Because if you look at where Nigeria is positioned, especially northern Nigeria, they share boundary with some countries. Nigeria has got a boundary with Niger Republic, Cameroon, and Chad in the north. And these borders are so porous that there's so many unmanned points where people just walk in and out of both the countries without anybody checking them. Smuggling is thriving, and militancy is thriving, and also banditry is thriving. So it's not really all about how prepared or inability of the Nigerian security agencies.
So it's about porous borders. There's a problem on the borders that they're not able to stop the free flow of people going back and forth with their neighbors.
Yes.
But why?
Yes.
Why is there such a problem in trying to tighten the border force?
No, this is we're talking about several hundred, if not thousands, of kilometers of border. And how many people do you have really to police these borders? Because there's no fence in most places. There's nothing like any sort of fence.
Right,
so,
but it would obviously be done with agreement with the neighboring countries, with Chad, with Cameroon, to be on board in tightening the borders, or is this something that has been an ongoing issue between the neighbors?
Yeah, it's something that has been there for many, many years. Despite all agreements, in most times it's actually not implemented as agreed, because we have a joint military task force comprising of all the countries from the border countries. So despite all that, it's still very impossible. Nigeria alone cannot even police its own border because there's so many areas that, people just crossing. So it's easy to bring in arms and ammunition. And then how prepared are our military? We've had cases of money being budgeted for by the Nigerian government to fight insurgents or to tackle terrorism. But we've had cases over the years where this money end up in private pockets. So, which is actually resulting in the military not even adequately equipped to confront the superior firepower in some cases of the Boko Haram insurgents or bandits, because Nigeria is battling both armed herdsmen, bandits across the northwest, Boko Haram factions, which I did mention, are now into two factions. So it's a whole lot of burden on the security agencies, who also have to tackle internal problems in the country.
Right. Internal problems in the country. Mr. Ibanga, let me get your take on this. Now, South Africa, Central Africa, Northern Africa, they're all seeing their share of violence and tensions. And this is nothing new. It's been evolving over the years. Do you feel that maybe this region is not getting the kind of international attention that it should, considering that now we are seeing the Islamic State of West Africa province sort of gaining strength, especially with what we're seeing across the region, especially Nigeria, in terms of violence?
Yeah, well, I can't understand why the international community is not taking serious attention or giving serious attention to what is happening in this country, especially in Nigeria. Because, for instance, if Nigeria goes down now, the level of crisis that we will face in Africa, and even some of these other Western countries, will be unimaginable. The fact is that Nigeria has been battling. Nigerian government has been battling to even buy arms. And there was a time the American government and some Western countries placed an embargo, and companies in those countries were not selling arms to Nigeria. But the African government should get their priorities right, and they should look inward and look for homegrown solutions to the problems they're having. Sometimes force may not be the only option to resolve some of these crises. There should be some ways of engaging with leaders of these groups and people who they have sympathy or they could listen to, and get them to the table.
Do you think do you think bringing them to the table, having negotiations, having a political approach to this is the answer to curtailing the kind of militant groups raising their heads and they're spreading their sort of footprint in the region?
The problem is that the poor leadership and poverty is partly responsible for what you are having here. In Nigeria, you know that about 23 million youths are unemployed. And you can have, and then about almost 11 million out of school children. And the country is almost becoming the poverty headquarters of the world. When you have this level of poverty, you have this level of helplessness amongst the people. It causes people to do things that they should not ordinarily do if the situation were conducive.
So the situation right now, as I understand, let me bring in Ms. Anietie also to get her take on this. Ms. Anietie, you could comment on what also Mr. Ibang is highlighting, that it is sort of a situation that has been created by poor governance, by badly used resources, lack of education, and general poverty and unemployment, to sort of encourage the growth of such groups, whether it's Boko Haram or other rival groups in the region.
Absolutely. I mean, research has been carried out within the region, and a lot of it has indicated that this insurgency has grown to the point where it is now because of a failure on the part of the government to actually ensure proper governance and infrastructure development in these areas. So where there's been a lacuna of government, there's been a feeling by the local populace that they've completely been abandoned and their lives really do not matter to the government of the day. There is a festering ground for these violent ideologies to take center stage and push forward into a full-blown conflict as we've seen it today. Essentially, these insurgency groups are saying that, the Nigerian government, we must do away with them because we want our own governance system and our own governance structure. And people are able to buy into this idea and lay their lives for these ideas because there's been a complete absence of the government in many of these communities. There's complete absence of things like education, healthcare infrastructure.
But I understand where you're going with that. But at the same time, we understand that Nigeria is roughly divided into a Muslim majority in the north and a Christian majority in the south. And that's pretty much where the Boko Haram, when it evolved, it was created. It came forward trying to push the Sharia law in the country. But they've been known in the past 10 years to not discriminate really on the basis of religion. They'll kill anybody, whether it's a Muslim or a Christian. Is that incorrect?
That is not incorrect, but Sharia law has already been in place in the country for many years, and it operates in many states in the north where you have, Christians and Muslims living together. So I think it is trying to Boko Haram today. Their main ideology is really centered around the fact that the Western influence that is currently in place in the country and which the government is propagating is completely unacceptable, and they're trying to, on stage the government and take their own priority locations and govern those areas as we see it today.
Okay, so Mr. Fidelis, let me ask you this then. Coming back to what we briefly touched on about the international communities. What is happening in the north of Africa as we see Sudan, we see Libya go through its turmoil? Is there a real threat to the West or of what is happening in Africa, including what is happening in Nigeria, and it's not being paid that kind of attention yet? I mean, we see Western forces interfere in other countries' businesses all the time. We're talking about the Middle East, we're talking about even parts of North Africa. What is it? What will it take to bring Nigeria to international attention on these groups that are gaining strength there?
Well, Nigeria's case, maybe because it has lasted several years, which is why, to some extent, attention is waning by the day, because if you look at it, this is more than 10 years now, or about that. At the point, the international community were trying to pay attention. They tried to reach some agreements which weren't concluded. But the thing, like Ibanga did mention, if anything happens to Nigeria at the moment, it's going to affect the entire continent and by extension even Europe and Asia, because we're talking of a country with more than 200 million people. Imagine if a full-scale war breaks out in the country, where the refugees are going to. I mean, if they pour into other countries, they will be overrun. So I think the international community needs to pay more attention, needs to also try to control the inflow of arms from, into Nigeria and also neighboring countries. Because as of today, Nigeria doesn't produce arms and ammunition that are being used to fight either in communal conflicts or terrorism or banditry. So first of all, they have to check the inflow of arms. They have to think of how to offer more technical advice to the Nigerian security agencies and also the neighboring countries who are also battling Boko Haram. Because Boko Haram is not just prevalent in Nigeria. We're talking about their presence in other neighboring countries like Niger, Cameroon, and Chad. Even though those countries, it's a bit, it's not as pronounced like what's happening in Nigeria. So the international community, I think it's also for the Nigerian government to reach out to the international community, because I don't think they've done enough in terms of like highlighting what's happening. Nigeria has played more politics with what's going on than actually making it as a priority, because we've had governments and even military authorities coming out to say that Boko Haram is Boko Haram attacks is almost over. But even just maybe sometimes even the same day they made that announcement, there's one attack or the other. Right. They've also tried to muzzle up the media, which is why most cases you don't even hear about attacks that are carried out, if not for maybe villagers who actually maybe come to media to tell them what's going on. So trying not to more like admit that things are getting out of hand on the part of the Nigerian government is not right. They need to really talk about the scale of what's going on and seek international assistance, because as it stands today, the military is fighting on all fronts and they look like they're getting overwhelmed by the amount of attacks being carried out both by Boko Haram and other groups across the country.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Fidelis, for your insight there. We fortunately run out of time as we talk about Boko Haram and other factions, other terrorist groups gaining strength in Nigeria. I want to thank you, Ms. Anietie and Mr. Ewang, for also giving your opinions here. Well, that's all the time we have for Newswire. We'll see you tomorrow. Till then, goodbye.